God is dead, and we have killed him. With those words, Friedrich Nietzsche ignited a philosophical firestorm that still burns today. But who was the man behind the madness? And what did he really mean? Welcome to Faces That Linger, where we bring history's most haunting minds back into the light. Today, we dive into the life, philosophy, and legacy of Friedrich Nietzsche, the man who dared to question everything. Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche was born in 1844 in Röcken, a small village in the Prussian province of Saxony. His father, Karl Ludwig Nietzsche, was a Lutheran pastor and a devout man, but he died from a brain ailment when Friedrich was only 5. This early tragedy marked young Nietzsche's emotional development and his eventual disillusionment with religion. Raised in a household dominated by women, his mother, sister, grandmother, and 2 aunts, Nietzsche's early life was one of discipline and devout Protestant values. A prodigious student, Nietzsche displayed remarkable talents in language and music. At the prestigious Schulpforta boarding school, he received a rigorous classical education. Later, he studied theology and philology at the University of Bonn and then at Leipzig, where he encountered the works of Arthur Schopenhauer, a philosopher whose pessimistic worldview would leave a lasting imprint on Nietzsche. At just 24 years old, Nietzsche became a professor of classical philology at the University of Basel in Switzerland. An extraordinary accomplishment, considering he had not yet completed his doctorate. Though highly respected for his scholarship, Nietzsche found academic life stifling. His interests were already moving far beyond ancient languages. He began to question the fundamental assumptions of Western culture, morality, truth, faith, and grew increasingly disillusioned with institutional religion and the values of his time. Poor health, including debilitating migraines, digestive problems, and deteriorating eyesight, forced him to resign from teaching in 1879. From then on, Nietzsche lived a nomadic and solitary life, often moving between Switzerland, Italy, and southern France. In small rented rooms and modest inns, he wrote feverishly, producing a body of work that would later reshape the course of modern philosophy. Among his major works are The Birth of Tragedy, 1872, his first major book, which explores Greek tragedy as a fusion of Apollonian order and Dionysian chaos. It also introduces his early thoughts on art and meaning. Human, All Too Human, 1878, a shift in style, more aphoristic and skeptical, marking his break from Romanticism and a move toward a more scientific view of morality. Thus spoke Zarathustra, 1883 to 1885, arguably his most famous and poetic work. Here, Nietzsche introduces his concept of the Übermensch, or Overman, and critiques conventional morality through a mythical narrative. Beyond Good and Evil, 1886, a critical analysis of traditional Western philosophy and its moral prejudices, emphasizing the will to power as a fundamental drive in human behavior. On the Genealogy of Morals, 1887, a companion piece to Beyond Good and Evil. This work dissects the origins of morality and contrasts master and slave moralities. His writing is stylistically unique, dense, provocative, rich with metaphor, irony, and paradox. Nietzsche didn't write systematic philosophy. He wrote to provoke, to unsettle, and to awaken his readers. He took aim at religion, morality, nationalism, democracy, and even science, arguing that modern society was spiritually decaying due to its clinging to outdated values. Nietzsche's philosophy is complex, controversial, and deeply influential. His infamous statement, "God is dead," is often misunderstood. He wasn't celebrating atheism, but warning that the decline of religion would leave Western civilization without a moral foundation. Without the guiding force of divine authority, Nietzsche feared humanity would succumb to nihilism, a condition where life feels meaningless. But he didn't stop at diagnosis. He proposed a remedy. Nietzsche challenged us to become our own creators of value. He introduced the concept of the Übermensch, an ideal human who rises above herd morality to forge their own path. The Übermensch does not seek validation from society, but embraces personal responsibility, creativity, and strength. Nietzsche also developed the idea of eternal recurrence, the thought experiment of living your life over and over again in exactly the same way. Would you say yes to such a life? For Nietzsche, affirmation in the face of this challenge was the ultimate embrace of existence. He coined the term will to power, a fundamental force he believed drove all human actions. More than survival, humans strive to expand, assert, and express themselves. Nietzsche condemned conventional morality as slave morality, rooted in resentment and weakness. He praised master morality, which originates from strength, pride, and the ability to define one's own values. Above all, Nietzsche called on us to practice amor fati, to love one's fate, and see suffering not as a burden, but as a catalyst for growth. Nietzsche's personal life was as tormented as his philosophy. He was chronically ill, often bedridden, and subject to deep bouts of loneliness. Despite his intelligence, he lived in obscurity, largely ignored by his contemporaries. His relationships were few and often fraught. He fell in love with Lou Andrea Salome, an intellectual and writer, but she rejected his proposal, leaving Nietzsche heartbroken. He had difficult relations with his family, particularly with his sister Elizabeth, whose views he did not share. Nietzsche's friends, including composer Richard Wagner, often disappointed or alienated him. Though Nietzsche once admired Wagner, he later turned against him, criticizing his nationalism and Christian themes. He continued to write despite worsening health. But in January 1889, Nietzsche's mind gave way. While in Turin, he witnessed a horse being whipped by its owner. In a fit of emotion, Nietzsche reportedly threw his arms around the animal's neck and collapsed in tears. It marked the beginning of his mental breakdown. He would never write again. The exact cause of his collapse remains debated. Some speculate syphilis, others a hereditary brain condition, or even a combination of physical and psychological factors. He spent the final 11 years of his life incapacitated, first under the care of his mother and later his sister. Nietzsche died in 1900, virtually unknown to the public. But in the decades that followed, his work would ignite a revolution in thought. In philosophy, he influenced the rise of existentialism, with thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus exploring similar themes of meaning and individual freedom. In psychology, Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung borrowed from Nietzsche's insights into the unconscious, repression, and human drives. Martin Heidegger, one of the 20th century's most important philosophers, engaged deeply with Nietzsche's ideas about being and truth. In literature and art, Nietzsche's themes of alienation, creation, and the absurd shaped the modernist and postmodernist movements. But Nietzsche's legacy was also distorted. After his death, his sister Elizabeth curated and edited his unpublished writings, compiling a work called The Will to Power. A nationalist and admirer of Hitler, Elizabeth misrepresented Nietzsche's ideas to align them with fascist ideologies. This led to Nietzsche being co-opted by the Nazi regime, a tragic irony given Nietzsche's fierce opposition to both nationalism and anti-Semitism. Today, scholars have largely corrected this narrative, recovering the real Nietzsche, a radical individualist, a cultural critic, and a thinker of extraordinary depth and bravery. Nietzsche remains a challenge. His writing is often enigmatic and his ideas uncomfortable. But that's the point. He wanted to shake us awake, to reject conformity, to become, as he said, what we are. Nietzsche once wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." More than a philosopher, he was a provocateur, unwilling to accept easy answers or inherited beliefs. He pushed us to face reality without illusions, to question the stories we tell ourselves, to become, in his words, who we truly are. His life was marked by pain, yet driven by purpose. And in his madness, we may find a strange kind of wisdom. As we end today's journey, let us leave with one final thought. In individuals, insanity is rare, but in groups, parties, and nations, it is the rule. Until next time, keep thinking deeply and never stop asking questions.